We are the Keyboard Samurai, a podcast focused on sharing insights to help those working in cybersecurity companies, be them technology or services. Each session, your host, Will Klusovsky, aka Will Clue, sits down with professionals in our industry to illuminate topics that will help your security biz, team, or self be better. Let's hack into it now.
Hey everybody, welcome. Will here as always, and today I'm super excited. We've had quite a few cybersecurity famous people, I think, on my podcast, but Neal's probably the first internet famous person, so I kind of fanboyed out a little bit when he actually agreed to do this. So honestly, he can talk about whatever he wants. I don't care. We just get to listen to his voice, which is kind of nice. So Neal, for those who don't know you, give us the 20, 30 seconds of who you are and why we care.
Yeah, I come from 30 years in advertising as a creative director. And I was crafting messages for some of the world's biggest power brands, Anheuser-Busch and Toyota, Lexus, HSBC, Sony, and so on and so on. And I teach entrepreneurs and executives now how to be more persuasive communicators. One of the principal jobs of a creative director in an advertising agency isn't just making the messages that go to the public. It's actually selling the ideas to the stakeholders so that they'll pay for them. And that is an altogether different challenge. For example, car companies, they don't just have marketing departments. They have gigantic networks of dealers. And you often have to get buy-in from a room of anywhere from 3 people to 300 people to 3,000 people. And the most potent message I have learned from the experience of selling to each one of those rooms is you never persuade anyone with bullet points. The default factory setting for human beings, Will, is stories. For 30,000 years, we have gathered around fires in one form or another in order to shape what our world means to us, what the things we believe, what we're going to do tomorrow, our dreams of the past, and so on. Stories are what makes people feel something. And so if you're going to persuade anyone to buy into your vision of the future, you have to do it in a way that it resonates with them emotionally. So this is what I'm doing now, is I'm pretty much a professional storyteller, and I teach people to tell better stories.
God, that's amazing. That sounds like a great job. No, it's funny though, because I do recurringly say, and I wish, like decades ago, I met a chief information security officer, a CISO, and he told me that his CISO stood for Chief Inside Selling Officer, and his job to just go around to everybody else and explain why this is happening and why it's important. And I probably say it in every podcast. Everybody listens is probably tired of hearing it. So yeah, that importance of being able to tell a story. So I guess let's start, like, why is that? Like, why are we wired that way? Why is that the way why is that the best way to communicate what we need to do?
Okay. So first of all, you're asking exactly the right question. Like, why is that the operating system? Well, human beings are emotional creatures, and we are very logic resistant, and, hence conspiracy theories and so on. And what people respond to is in order for them to make sense of everything around them, they have to bring order to chaos by creating a kind of tale around it. They have to say, this results in that. The tiger does this because of that. Human beings are remarkably clever. We are marvelous puzzle solvers. We can find a face in a piece of toast, but this ability to see patterns, and because of our ability to see patterns, we can then do deductive reasoning and so on. That ability to see patterns also creates in our mind a kind of history that we play. Everything we think about ourselves is a story we've told ourselves. And Will, I'll give you an example of, you can either have positive self-talk or negative self-talk. Sure. You can say to yourself, oh, I can't stand that I am that way. I'm always late for everything. That's a story you're telling yourself, that you're late for everything. And unfortunately, if you bang away at that story and you keep telling yourself that story, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The same way that pretty much upbeat people that have energy and think of possibilities, they don't say to themselves, oh, I'm always late. They say, wow, I got a lot going on. Let me see if I can't, make sure that I'm ready for this next thing. This is important to me. The self-talk that they have, which is a story, is about how they're going to approach the world. Imagine standing in front of potential investors, and you're trying to persuade them to adopt a technology that has not necessarily proven itself in the marketplace yet. There's so many ideas like this. A really, really good example of that would be, say, Uber, or Airbnb. The reason they were such colossal investments, why they paid off, is because this is what I've heard from angel investors. They say, what we're looking for is a really smart idea that sounds incredibly stupid. Because what the angel investors are doing is they're thinking, the story they're telling themselves in their head isn't, why won't this work? Will, you could talk yourself out of the light bulb as an idea if you wanted to. If you took the wrong tack, you'd say, oh, this light bulb thing, you got to have power plants. We don't have any of those. It's really dangerous, this electricity stuff. Candles work fine and they're cheap. You could talk yourself out of the light bulb. But by the same token, an angel investor doesn't sit there and say, why won't this work? They say, why might this work? What happened if it did work? What kind of money would be made if we would replace the entire structure of taxis in the United States? Jeez, money changing hands if we could figure this out. And so storytelling becomes, I want you to imagine yourself on a Friday night in Manhattan and it has begun to rain. What are your odds of getting a taxi in the next 45 minutes? Very close to zero. What if I could use this device to get you one in the next 5 minutes? And what if it was cleaner, faster, safer, and less hassle than a taxi? How am I doing so far? You're telling them a story about your experience that has yet to happen, that hasn't happened anywhere, but you're describing an experience that is so vastly better than what you're experiencing now. If you were an angel investor, you'd start going, I'm with you so far. Keep going. So this is all storytelling. Now, in your case, cybersecurity experts, what I have seen a couple of times, people who have been able to tell the story of the stakes in such a way that essentially any argument over price becomes kind of silly, right? The way I heard it described once was, they said, if I painted a white line on the floor, 4 inches wide, 20 feet long, and I asked you to walk on that line from one end of the room to the other, I don't think you'd have very much problem, would you? No. In fact, you might be a little cavalier about how you walk across that line.
Sure.
What happens if I raise that line 900 feet in the air? I think you'd be a lot more careful. Now, here's the thing. Your security, your data security, what would happen if you got hacked, if you got held ransomware and so forth? You're 900 feet in the air. You just don't know it. It's time to stop being cavalier about this. Can you imagine Monday morning when you find out you have to pay a ransom to get your data? What does that look like for you? You could fall. The whole thing could collapse. It's all a story of the stakes, the tightrope that you walk. And I've seen people at the Federal Reserve Bank in San Francisco complaining about the cybersecurity message service. The stuff they have to go through. The lag, the computer, right? Exactly, and the computer takes 35 minutes to boot up in the morning, and so on. And I watched a real pro explain to them, "Hey, it's time for you to shut the fuck up."
Here's what's happening.
And nut up. Okay. Because you trust me when I tell you, you don't want to be the one that let hackers into the building at the Fed. Okay. That's a very unpleasant Monday for you.
No doubt.
So all of this is storytelling. It's framing how you feel about something emotionally, framing the stakes. And in your line of work, it becomes particularly important because I don't think people grasp the value you're bringing. I don't think they sufficiently emotionally understand the consequences of inaction.
So that's interesting. So this will be fun. A couple of things that I'm hearing, like one, I hear a lot of startups that want to, they bring me products and I take a look at them and say stuff. And usually what they do is they're like, our lights blink brighter than other people's lights. And the first thing I tell them
Yeah.
is that's not important. What business problems do you solve, right? Going back to that
Yeah.
story, what happens if this isn't done? The other part, which I think you hit on a little bit there, is, we talk about, there's an identity problem in security, and I don't mean identity like your logins, but people who work in security think that they're tier 1 super space hero people that are going to go out and save the world, and really they're brakes on the race car, right? The business is a car. It's meant to go fast, and when it comes to a corner, it wants to know the brakes work. So for most of the time in security, the business just wants to know that when I hit the brakes, it's going to slow down and turn, right?
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
that concept that you just kind of laid there out is to kind of like triggered that in my head.
Yeah, it is an unfortunate characteristic of the business that you don't want them to notice what you do.
Security should be boring.
You're right. The idea of even knowing your name is a problem, because the day they find out who you are is the day something went wrong and needs correcting. And it's a little bit like being a goalie, on a soccer pitch or a hockey rink. Oh man, people don't realize if you have a bad night, it's gonna be a bad night.
Right.
You
Yeah,
can
it's
have
about
a
the blocks you
great
missed,
night.
not about the ones you
Right.
did. You made, right?
Right. You could have a anything. Anyway, you could have a fantastic night and nobody's gonna mention it.
Right.
So,
Like my mom used to have a thing hanging in the kitchen that was housework is only noticed when it's not done, kind of thing, right?
yeah. Yeah. But anyway,
So
the
good.
please, I'm sorry.
Oh no, I was going to ask, like, so as I look at, those of us working in security firms, whether we're in technology or services side, there's a huge part. Like, I do a lot of sales enablement. I do a lot of marketing. Like you said, we have to have the right message. I like to support a lot of those. And how do we get to be better storytellers? What are the things that we need to be working on?
Yeah. I think the first thing is, and this is essential, is the recognition that stories are just better than bullet points. It takes a lot. When somebody's deeply analytical, they tend to be rational. They tend to be driven by, you know, points and data. And unfortunately, most of the world doesn't operate with that same mindset. They're just most human beings are logic resistant, and so what they have to do is they have to be sort of cajoled. And the phrase we always used to have back when I was working in advertising was, "Nobody changes their mind unless they want to."
Yeah.
And so you can talk till you're blue in the face with really good reasons why something should be done, and any excuse will do. If they don't want to do it, they'll make up reasons why they don't want to do it. On the other hand, if they feel like some itch is going to get scratched by doing it, they get to see themselves in a new way for having agreed to something, or for having championed something. They can sort of see what the rewards are. As soon as they are able to frame something as, the downside of this is X, but the upside is, man, limitless. Um, you know, so the first part of it, of telling a good story, is just recognizing that human beings are emotional creatures, and as such, they respond to dangers emotionally, and they respond to opportunities emotionally. You have to paint them a picture of possibilities, and you also have to create, the boogeyman under the bed in a kind of vivid way for them to understand. I did see a pitch once where they were talking about a new way to make data secure, and they spent a long time describing a department of the FSB in Russia. The now the new version of the KGB.
KGB,
And they said, Yeah, they said, I want to describe to you what this guy does all day, because there are armies, literally armies, trying to get at your data. These are not idiots. These are highly trained military officers with a remit to get into your systems. This guy went to such and such university. He has a degree in this. My guess is he could probably beat you at chess. And his profession, his job for which he is paid, is to steal your data. Now, how long do you think it would take him, given his background, his inclination, his training, his incentives, if he's really determined to get in?
Mm-hmm.
You know, just like people pick muggers, they don't look for the hard doors, they look for the easy ones.
Right.
The bigger job you do, the less likely you are to attract the attention of Vasily. He doesn't want to spend his day trying to crack your nut when it looks like it's armor plated, or, there's, and so on and so on. In the portrayal of this person, they internalize the idea that, yeah, those threats are definitely out there, and it's not some cracker in his basement. It's a weaponized professional with the latest technology and technique who, if you are too attractive as a target, he'll knock you off like a 80-year-old mugging. So forgive me, I'm not truly answering your question. The idea
No, it's great. Well, because again, something else that I talk a lot about, I learned a long time ago when I was doing my master's thesis, was like the theory of conceptual change. And you just kind of hit on that, which is because in security, it's really hard to sell on FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. The whole idea of like doom and gloom, because all of us are in it. And you mentioned this before, and I was just thinking like, oh, so my jaded personality is the reason I get up every day and I'm not all excited about life, because I just have this knowingness of like how effed everything already is. But when you talk about something, people know, like the theory is like, kids know that you can tell them the earth is round and they're like, oh yeah, I get it. But when you show them a globe, they're like, oh, I see it. And even then, like you think about like how airplanes travel, you don't realize, like if you're going to go from the United States over to Asia, especially in the top, you might go over the top, not across the side, right? So until they kind of get all of that context to put it together, they don't really get it.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, so yeah. So to answer, yeah. So you definitely answered. So I guess I was thinking. So the first point you hit on was avoid the bullet points, which I get. So what are like the elements of telling a good story too? Go ahead.
Yeah, you could certainly and absolutely use bullet points in a document, because people like to have their information organized in a way.
Yeah, we don't want to read.
Right. Exactly, right? Actually, the irony is, in print, that's when you don't want to tell a story. It's TLDR, right? I just want just bottom line me. What are the 5 things? And part of the reason that bullet points are so effective in a document is it gives the person the opportunity to repeat those things later. Now, just to go quickly back to why a story is better than bullet points in a live presentation is, I could give you 5 bullet points to remember. They are your talking points about why my product is either superior or should be adopted. Okay. I give you the talking points. 45 minutes later, you may remember 3 of them. You won't get them all. Our brains just are not, we can't remember long strings of numbers or addresses or things like bullet points. However, you probably haven't heard the story of the 3 little pigs in 15 years or David and Goliath, in 20 years. And you could repeat that story to me right now and get it pretty right.
Nice.
Why? Because that's how our brains are organized. Narratives are very memorable. And if I give you the story and I say, you know what it's like? It's like this. It's like this plus this. That's what we're talking about. And all of a sudden, do you remember when Steve Jobs was announcing the iPod and the whole story was it's 1,000 songs in your pocket?
Yeah, that was great.
You go, got it. Very quick story. And by the way, he's one of these, if you really want to become a good storyteller, especially a persuasive storyteller, what Steve Jobs seemed to have both instinctively and by practicing is he understood drama. So when he was launching the iPhone, he didn't introduce it and come out and say, presenting the iPhone, or, I'm here to introduce an iPhone. He said he was here to introduce 3 devices. And he kept saying them over and over, an internet browser, a camera, and an iPod and a phone. And then he would say it again, an internet browser, an iPod and a phone, a device. And he said it over and over. And then all of a sudden people started going, oh, it's one thing, and he kept saying it over. And then he goes, you getting it? You getting it? And the audience started to get it. And then finally goes, yeah, it's one device. And then the place, erupted.
It's interesting. Who's the, I was just reading that his CMO, for lack of a better term, I can't remember who it was a great storyteller. That he was the guy that went and convinced him that, because I think he invented the I terminology instead of, I think Steve wanted to do Mac guy, and then we would
I didn't know that.
Phone guy. Yeah, I'll have to find it. There's somebody that was recently talking about marketing and storytelling, and the person that Steve had worked with, because Steve had great ideas, obviously, but he was like, no, you need to tell the story this way to get the message across. And he kind of, the whole joke of it was if that guy hadn't been there, we would have we'd have a phone guy and a computer guy, and instead of an iMac and an iPhone and all that. He came up with the I term.
Maybe. There's another interesting. I was not in the room when Shia Day won the advertising account for Apple, from its previous agency. But I've heard the story of how Steve Jobs briefed the agencies that were going to do the advertising, for the pitch. But before I get to that story, I just want to say very quickly that in order to be a better storyteller, you have to become a student of storytelling. In other words, if you want to write a movie, the first thing you need to do is you need to go out and watch a lot of movies. And what's more, you need to find out what you like, and then write a movie that you want to see. This is the thing, is that when you go out and you watch presentations, or you watch people tell stories, whether it's Garrison Keillor and Prairie Home Companion, or whether it's me and my TikTok videos and what have you, what happens is, when you watch somebody who can craft a story pretty nicely, you start to recognize, oh, okay, this is kind of how it's done. Bill Burr tells a marvelous story.
Yes.
The great stand-up comedians, Dave Chappelle, his whole act is not a series of jokes. It's one story leads to the next story, and so on.
So good.
And when you watch them, when you really sit and or become a student of it, you start to pick up your graduate degree in how to entertain and persuade. And so that's the first thing, is you become a student of, you start watching stand-up comedians, and they will teach you by absorption, by osmosis. They'll teach you what you should probably do yourself. But you should not be afraid to be yourself. Don't, you're not going to be Dave Chappelle. You're not going to be Mark Maron. You're going to be yourself. It helps to take these examples in to find out what you like and tell a story the way you like to tell it. I had the benefit of doing thousands of presentations, and just like a stand-up comedian who does night after night after night, what they become good at is reading the audience. They become good at reading the room and sensing its temperature and seeing whether, what they respond to. And I watched Gary Shandling used to do a lot of nights at the Comedy and Magic Club in LA, in Hermosa Beach. And I had a kind of deal with the bartender back there in the 90s. And I used to sit, and he would let me nurse a Budweiser and watch the acts on their first time and the second show. And Shandling was one of those guys that tuned it up with every show. Every show would be ever so slightly different. He was not one of those guys that just did exactly the same thing time after time. And if you watch Bill Burr, who I have an unbelievable admiration for, you'll notice that there are times when he'll make a remark like, wow, that sucked the air out of the room. Or,
he acknowledges I fucked up.
What he's doing is he's actually tailoring the show to the audience by acknowledging that they play a part. And in doing so, the show becomes their property. They start to own the show. And that is really, really significant for getting them on his side. He is very famous for having done a bit at a Philadelphia gig where it was some kind of benefit. And I think there was something like 20 comedians that were going to come on. And he was a very big fan of the guy that went on before him. And because of circumstances, they booed this guy. And he was really insulted. Bill Burr was incredibly insulted that they would boo this guy who he considered, top notch. So what Burr did was, I think he was out there for 8 or 9 minutes, and he goes out there and just starts insulting Philadelphia, and just
which is easy to do as a Pennsylvania resident.
Philadelphia sports fans are notorious. They're notorious as some of the worst sports fans in the world. They'll boo their own teams at the drop of a hat.
Yeah.
And so he gets out there, and for the first 4 minutes, it's like a jet exhaust of boos. And he says, if you think you're going to boo me off the stage, you got another thing coming. I'm going to do the full 9 minutes. We're at 4 minutes right now. So buckle up, buttercup. We're going the whole 9. And he just kept it up. He kept up this diatribe of insults. And Will, by the time he got to the end, he didn't get a standing ovation, but he got an ovation because the Philadelphians respected the fact that he just spent the whole time giving him the finger. It's like, you're not tougher than me. I am who I am. And they respected that he was not going to apologize. And to me, if I had been there that night, even as a proud Philadelphian, I would be bragging about that night for the rest of my life, about how I was there to see it, because they own it. The Philadelphians now own that set in a way that no Boston audience ever gets to make that claim. Sure. And so in the same spirit as when you're telling a story and it becomes a conversation, which is, again, it's a power of a story, because stories tend to reflect common experience. Well, once somebody senses that it's a conversation and it's not me just presenting a deck, well, all of a sudden they start to own the exchange. They start to feel as though they're participants, and they're standing next to you, and we're together on this. To go back to a Steve Jobs example of when he was briefing the ad agencies on what he wanted the next campaign to be for Apple. Subsequently, the campaign turned out to be the Think Different campaign. That was the result of this brief. What he would do is he came into a room with a whiteboard. There were no bullet points. There was no deck. There was no document. He came in with a marker and went up to a whiteboard and started drawing little boxes and putting names in there like iMac and Newton and so on. And I think he had something like 35 boxes up on the whiteboard that he drew while they were standing there. And he said, everything that you see on this board represents millions and sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars in investment from Apple. But these are the ones we've canceled after all that investment. And he starts putting marks through all of these boxes until from the 30 that were up there, it's down to 3. And then he says, I am betting the entire future of this company on these 3 products, because they are the only ones that truly have the essence of Apple in them. They do this, and they do that. And that, I know they're going to be winners. One of them was the iMac, and one of them was like the iPod, and one of them was and what he ultimately said was, he goes, I am newly back at this company, and I am here essentially telling you I've just canceled the efforts of about 80% of this organization. But I'm also here to tell you this. If you bought a Mac in the last 2 years, I don't know what the hell's wrong with you. This company has lost its way. So what I want the first advertising to do is I want it to be a love letter to the people that have stuck with us. You have to be different to have hung on. And these products that I'm showing you now, those are the rewards. If they wait, this will be the payoff. I want to give them a gift of these 3 products as a reward. So I want you to come back to me with a love letter to those customers. And that was the Think Different campaign, here's to the rebels and so on.
Right.
And the briefing was in itself a brilliant piece of advertising. It was a story. It was a story about a company that had lost its way, that was betting the farm on 3 products, And the reason he'd selected them was because of what they would mean to the people that hung with them. And that is a very easy brief to repeat later. You don't even have to take notes. You don't literally have to write it down. You go back to the agency, they say, what did he say? Well, I'll tell you what he said. And you can do it note for note. And that is, yeah. It was a story about a company that had lost its way, but was finding it again. And in finding it, it will be better than it ever was. So anytime you are looking for the story, you do really have to get to the essence of not just, what do I do here? But who is it for? I want to be able to walk into that room and say, I'm going to be the best part of your day. And, I could see somebody walking in and saying, I had an experience on jury duty 3 weeks ago. It was like this, Will. I had been selected to be on the jury, and much to my lament. And as I was sitting there in the jury box and the opening arguments from the people came in, the first lawyer got up and he said, wow, am I going to make your day? And we all went, what? And he goes, here's what's going to happen. You're going to get in that jury box. You're going to get in the jury room after we're all done here, myself and this DA. And you're going to have to decide how to vote, guilty or not guilty. It's going to take you about 14 minutes, if that, because I am going to get up here and prove absolutely and beyond a shadow of a doubt that he could not possibly have been where they claim he was. I'll show you 3 pieces of evidence so that when this is all said and done, I'll be surprised if you don't have, that you'll even make it halfway through your coffee. Okay. And then he sat down and we all just went, God, I hope he's right.
Yeah,
right.
Thank you.
Everybody says, well, I don't know how this is going to go, but I hope it goes like that. So what happens is, how confirmation bias goes. Confirmation bias is, I hear the evidence that I want to hear now. As it turned out, he was absolutely right. They had ATM photos of him. So it was like, I don't even know why they're going through the motions on this. This is ridiculous. But what happens is, with that as an opening message, he has teed up my experience as a juror, not the case, but what it's like to be me and how it's going to go. And he's basically making me a promise that I hope is true. And, that's a story. The story is what it's going to be like when you render a verdict. Right. And oftentimes, we are a little bit too on the nose with how we, and so I could see that you could actually, you could use a story like that and you could say, I had this experience, it was jury duty, the attorney came in and he said this, and I was thinking, oh man, I hope he's right. Well, as it turned out, he was right. Now, why do I tell you that story? Because my being in front of you today is a little bit like that. Well, no, in fact, it's a lot like that. I'm going to show you something you're going to want to adopt.
Here's the 3 bullet points.
There are going to be 3 really good reasons. So let's get started. Okay. Do you ever do this? Well, your ass is hanging on the ragged edge of disaster when that happens. I'm going to keep that from happening. How everybody likes to save money? I'm going to save you some money. Okay. I put that in the middle because even though that's wonderful, that's not the highlight. The last thing. Now, this is the thing. And this, by the way, this is how we used to present concepts to our clients. Nice. Whether it was Nokia or HSBC, it would be this sort of setup of I want you to imagine that this is happening to you as as a consumer of this product, and you're just thinking to yourself, does it really have to be this way? No, it doesn't have to be this way. And when you are like that, two phenomena happen. The first is they are willing to change their minds because they see it clearly and they appreciate in an affectionate way. They appreciate the fact that you've made it easy. This wasn't a boring PowerPoint presentation of 30, that took me 35 minutes and I read the slides to you. No, what it was actually kind of fun, and it gave me something I can repeat and something that I can sell into my organization pretty easily. And on top of that, there was one extra thing, which is when people present information this way, they look smarter than somebody who just read it to you.
Mm-hmm.
And with that intelligence comes your confidence that if I did change my mind, I would be in the hands of this cat. And he seems like he knows what he's talking about. There's a qual. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, no, that's a great, because I mean, to me, like that's an aha moment that like anybody listening should think. It's like, if you can tell them a story that they can eat, like they don't have to write down the data, they can go tell that story. If the CISO can go tell that story to the CFO or the COO, his team, whatever, repeat that, and then they get it. That resonates a lot. And the other thing is that what was it you said? I lost it already.
Well, they think of you as more intelligent because you made it clearer and bite-sized and easy.
And the mind changing. That was another, like I had just started talking to somebody about this. And it's kind of it sounds badder. It sounds worse than it is. It's not malicious, but you definitely want them to think it was their idea. Because as somebody who's very logical and very like fact-based and process, like I see problems and I can break them down and I see the solution. It's very obvious to me why I do it. But if somebody else brings me that idea or tells me that I need to do this or this is the right way to do it, then I'm immediately emotionally going to push back on that. Right. That's
yeah. People don't want to feel like they were sold.
Yes.
They don't want to feel like they were sold. They want to, and by the way, a couple of tips for your audience when it comes to telling any story, and that is don't cast yourself as the hero of the story. Because people, on LinkedIn, you'll see these things, I'm the number one of this, or I'm great. No, they'll tell a story and they're the hero. And what they think is that we're all looking at them as, wow, what an admirable person who has achieved great things and who I want to give my business to. No, they're like, I cannot wait for you to fall on your face. Like
bragger.
I will cheer the day you lose all your money. If you think, and so what's happened is, even if you have a superior product, I am disinclined to buy it because I don't want to vote for you with my money. Now, look, let's you tell the exact same story, but you are not the hero. Somebody else is the hero, whether it's a fictitious person who is representing you or not. But rather, you are recounting the story about somebody who you admire or about who achieved something and you pulled a lesson from it. Now what happens is you and I, you, the audience, and me, the person telling you the story, we're standing side by side. We're standing next to each other, watching those events. And now we can share that together. So to go back to your point, which was sometimes, I just don't want to feel like I'm being sold. I don't want to change my mind. I just don't want to, so I'm not gonna. This is part of the chemistry of, of charisma is charismatic people are not impressive people. Charismatic people are the ones that are able to make you feel like you're in on this. You're part of this solution. They draw people to them because they paint a picture of all of us in this together. There are all kinds of reasons why people buy a product. But again, to return to an earlier theme, emotion makes up about 80% of the decision. And so therefore it becomes really key that people like you. When you're presenting an idea, you want to make them feel like I could probably trust this person. And they seem like they're doing these things for the right reasons. And sometimes it's just enthusiasm. You go, oh, I've really been looking forward to this. Well, I couldn't wait for us to get together because I wanted to tell you this thing. Well, right away, if you were to say something like that, I've been looking forward to this because I wanted to share this with you, it indicates you were thinking about them, like that they were on your mind, and that you had something special. It's almost like somebody sending you a book in the mail.
Oh yeah.
Anybody who takes the time to get postage on anything now in an era of email.
Oh yeah, 100%.
That is an extraordinarily emotional reaction you get out of people. It's like, wow, they really,
it was in one of Josh Braun's posts, we were all kind of conversing about like that, like the whole idea of like, I can create an email list and set, like, that's easy. Anybody
Yeah.
who gets the email from me is going to be like, okay, whatever. They're not going to read it. But if I go to UPS or FedEx and pay for something and to be sent to your house, you're going to open it
Yeah.
because this person put in
Yeah.
effort. Like that means something too. It was interesting.
Yeah.
So
It doesn't scale.
yeah, no, it doesn't. But I mean, it's that idea, it's that concept. I'm gonna see
Yes.
if I can get some free advice consulting from you,
Okay.
because so I love stories. I'm a huge you know I love the idea of storytelling. I love consuming it. I'm a creative in a technical space, but I'm also like I'll give you the example. I don't like suspense movies because I know what's going to happen and I just want it to happen. And the
Yeah.
whole point of the suspense movie is dragging out what we all know is going to happen, right? So when
Well, not a good one.
no, well, but yeah, and sometimes you are, but like, yeah, and maybe you don't know everything, but again, it's like I just want to get to it.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
when it comes to even with sales and marketing and other things like that, like I love the messaging part. I love crafting all the story. But when I get to talk to somebody, if I assume they're like me, then I want to cut to the chase. I just want to get to
Yeah.
the details, the information. So even when I do, like I do a lot of presentations, even so, even when I'm presenting, how do I get myself into that mindset to be like, well, no, I need to tell the story. I need to take the time. I need to Don Draper this, right? And be comfortable with that. For me, honestly, being slow and not just getting to the point.
I think I understand your question. You find it exhausting to have to go down a shaggy dog story and listen to somebody describe, what the Jeep looked like and so on.
Right.
What a good idea whenever you're starting a story is that the first 10 seconds contains within it either a paradox or an insight. Here's an example. You would say, I believe that minor league baseball is vastly superior to Major League Baseball, in spite of the fact that in its very title, it calls itself second rate.
Right.
Let me prove what I'm talking about. Okay, so right off the bat, you're going, okay, I know what this is about. And he's going to make an argument that minor league baseball is better than its more expensive, older brother. All right, I'm gonna hang on long enough to find out essentially what he's saying. And when you get to the end of a story like that, you will have proven your point, and then there will be a reason you told that story. It's like, why would Will be telling me about minor league baseball? What's the point of that? And what Will is making a point about is where value actually comes from. Value in a spectator sport isn't, that I'm watching the greatest players in the world. I couldn't tell you the damn difference between a talented minor leaguer and the greatest players in the world. I can't see it from up here.
Mm-hmm.
What I want to see though, I want to be involved in a sport where something is at stake and so on. Okay. If I said, for example, I think, I started my story by saying, I believe that we are all, as a culture, celebrating birthdays backwards. Okay, right off the bat, you're going like, what?
What?
Yeah, what I mean is, you're the one that got the gift of the year. Why should everybody have to throw gifts on top of it? You should be the one distributing gifts for your good fortune this year, particularly if you had a good year. That's a good way that'll earn you another birthday. But let me tell you exactly how, a story about how that came to be. There's another example, where you start out with a paradox or an insight saying that I believe because of quantum physics, they have proven that we are underestimating the power of cheerful people. Each of these, it takes just a couple of seconds to propose a kind of paradox or an interesting observation. Now you've bought permission for probably about another 15 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when you start rolling into, a tale. As long as in the telling of the story, there are interesting characters that people care about, they'll hang on for a long time. They won't be trying to rush you. They want to find out what happened to the 90-year-old man who was driving the tow truck, and barely spoke English, but was in a good mood anyway. They want to find out what happened to the cynical woman behind the counter who apparently was running the operation. If you can paint a picture of vivid characters that people care about, they'll hang on for a long time. My guess is that in the movies that you're talking about, suspense movies where you just want to get to the end, they're not doing a good enough job of setting up the protagonists so that you care about them. Like what they're doing is, in horror movies, the thing that I cannot stand is when all of us in the theater are going, don't go down there.
Yeah.
And the idiot goes down there anyway, because at that point, emotionally, I'm going, oh, to hell with you. Whatever happens now.
Write them all.
Jackass. But if I care about a character because they're not an idiot, now I want to see how they finagle their way out of this scenario. But anyway, I think the chief answer to your question is by setting up an interesting premise, which is something unexpected or an observation that you had, then for example, it could be, you should never have to depend on the cleaning woman to save your company from a data breach. But that's what happened the first time I saw this. Well,
All right.
Or it could be, you'd be surprised where threats come from. I knew somebody that I'd known for 3 years turned out to be such and such, that they'll give you permission to keep talking if you set up people we care about and an interesting way to start. Almost every movie that's worth its salt starts
Character
out
development
by,
is number one.
Yeah, they give you a person. They give you a person that wants something, and there's something standing in their way. And
it's the hero's journey.
You go to, yeah, exactly. If you go to the very beginning of Saving Private Ryan, they do a marvelous job of saying, this guy Ryan comes from a family of 5 brothers, and 4 of them are dead, and they don't want to be the one to have to go to that mom and say they're all dead. You lost them all. So we're going to go get that son of a bitch. I don't care. And what happens is in the course of the movie, that patrol, with Tom Hanks, and Hanks dies going to get him. It's such a deeply emotional thing because they realize that the mission actually matters. Like, is it worth risking our lives? Unfortunately, it is. And because you care, every twist and turn, every threat becomes, it affects you deeply. Well, that's the secret to a great story. Is it's about somebody who is looking for something, and there's something standing in their way. And when I tell the story about the minor league baseball, it's really about my daughter who was 6.5 at the time. Did you ever hear that one? It was called Go Where You Actually Matter. I
don't think so.
I'll just tell it very quickly for the benefit of your audience. I believe that minor league baseball is a better value than Major League Baseball by a long shot. And we had gone to a Yankees game, and I dropped $600 on nothing but tickets. And the kids wanted to leave by the 6th inning, so I was like, the hell with this. So we wound up going to see our local minor league ballpark, which was the New Jersey Jackals. And trust me, they were not great. None of these kids were headed for the majors. Okay. And they didn't even have names on the backs of their jerseys because they were going to need that shirt probably in another 3 months when we cycle somebody else through here.
For sure.
Well, but because of their talent level, even a pop fly was sort of an adventure. But we were into it. The kids loved it, and it was $8 a ticket, and the hot dogs were $1, and parking was free. And every inning had some kind of crazy activity for the kids. Well, we were getting our brains beat in one day by this farm team that was legit. They had names on the backs of their jerseys. They had real prospects on their teams. And we were down by about 8 runs, maybe 9, going into the 9th inning. And there was this young kid swinging his bat in the on-deck circle. My little girl says to me, "Hey, Dad, who's number 10?" And I look him up on the Xeroxed program, and I go, "Oh, that's Sanchez." So she runs down to the third baseline, and she goes, "Hey, Sanchez!" And he turns around and sees this little girl, and she goes, "You can do it!" And he gets this weird expression on his face, this kind of funny sort of like, "Oh, okay." He steps in the box. He's a lefty, right? So he can still see her on the third baseline. So First pitch, it's a hanging curve, and he just smokes it. It goes into orbit. It goes into orbit. It's gone. So he's trotting the bases. He comes around second, and now he's pointed at third, and he sees her, and he goes like this. Like that. And she goes, "Wah!" And you could hear her rebel yell in Bergen County. Well, what happened was now 3 or 4 other kids come running down to the third baseline. And they start yelling out the players' names. And it starts a rally. And guys are hitting for extra bases. And they're stealing, and they're stealing home. And they're just doing all right. The place is lit on fire. And it's bedlam. And now it's tied. And this other team brings in their big unit reliever, this big prospect's going to play for the Mets. They bring him in to end the shenanigans. Well, Sanchez has come up again. They've gone around the order. Now he's up again. And he's standing in the box. And the first 2 pitches just rocket by him. He doesn't get anything on them at all. And he takes a step back. And you can see on his face, shit. Because he knows he's out of his depth. He knows this guy is better. And he looks up, he takes a breath, and he looks, a little girl goes like this to him. And you can see it on his face that what he's thinking is, I am not going to go down looking, I'm going to go out trying. Okay. So he manages to get the tiniest flick of like the next 6 pitches. He's fouling them off, just staying in it. Well, now this pitcher's had enough of that. So he starts throwing at Sanchez like he's brushing him back. And now the count is full and the place is chaos. It's just everybody's on their feet. And he takes a step back. He looks up and he does this kind of wink. And then he steps back and in it comes just the high heat, everything this guy had, he could get on it. And Sanchez took him yard. And it just went. It was like in a backyard pool filter 3 blocks away. Okay, so he's now, he's rounding second and I'm waiting for the thing, but it's too late because every kid has rushed the field.
Right.
And there's like 25 kids on the field and the parents are going down to retrieve their kids. I'm down there because I'm afraid Tony's going to wind up on the team bus. And the manager and I are sitting next to each other. We're standing there and they took a team photo with the kids in it. And he says, Sanchez hasn't hit a home run in the whole time he's been here, 18 months. And tonight he hit 2. So my question to you is your daughter coming back tomorrow? So, yeah, you think? And the end of the story, as I told it, was, I have been to some of the best stadiums in the world, and I have seen the best players money can buy, but there is just nothing there for me if 5 or 6 kids yelling from the third baseline just don't make any difference.
That's profound. Love it.
Yeah.
Well, Neal, I could talk to you for hours. In fact,
back at you, Will.
I welcome it. Anytime you want to call me.
Right on.
Where can everybody find you on the interwebs? Should they want to?
Yeah. It's www.storyfire.net. Oh yeah, good. Yeah, storyfire.net is the name of my course. It's actually quite good. It's way underpriced. I've been counseled I need to make it like $1,000, but it's not. It's very reasonable. Even the pro version is only $250, and with the pro version, we do a call every couple of weeks where people get to raise their own issues, just like you and I. We're talking like this now. So storyfire.net. And
great. Thanks, Neal. I appreciate your time, man. Been great.
Hey, back at you, Will. It's fun to talk.
Thanks.
Thanks for enjoying Keyboard Samurai Podcasts. If you'd like to engage, find Will on LinkedIn at /WillClue or visit at willclue.me. That's WILKLU.me for more info. Disconnecting now. Synac you later.